By Cinnamon Bridges on air for Scotland. Sponsored by Tweet Street Scotland Occupied, home of the satirical Saltire. I'm Cinnamon Bridges, aka Peter. This is a special 4-part documentary that we're going to be putting out. I spent 4 days and 3 nights in the company of Dave Sharp, who is a child abuse survivor and campaigner. And we documented just his journey from being placed in a care home as a child, all the way through to what's happening to him now. Dave is a whistleblower and he wants his story to be told. So without further ado, what we're going to do is we're going to put on the feature, which is episode 1. There'll be, as I say, 4 episodes that will be released over the course of the next few weeks. So let's get down to it. So I'm here today with Dave Sharp, the Scottish child abuse survivor and campaigner, and we're at Dave's starting point. So I'll let you explain, Dave.
Well, this is Nazareth House where it all started 63 years ago. I lost me just after I was born, and they put me here, and I spent the first 8 years of my life here. And yeah, this is the first time I've been back in this process of telling my story. A story which is going to lead to 16 years in care, a number of years homeless, and then some tragedy and some bad mistakes, and then how my life ended, how I ended up in prison, and basically how the justice system, and basically Scotland as a whole, how it treats survivors of in-care abuse. So this is it, this is where I was brought up 63 years ago. It's changed now because it's all, most of it's all flats now, but the main entrance is still here. And over here we have the gardens here, where I remember quite clearly as kids at Easter time we used to hide the Easter eggs all around these different parts, and I think these walls were actually bigger. And there was more trees and more bushes, but they used to hide the Easter eggs, so that was one of the good memories. We would all come out on Sunday and play like kids. But I don't have much memory of what went on inside, because my first 8 years was actually, there's no bad memories. I was a young kid, a young child, although we do know there is much recording and much evidence to show that a lot of child abuse happened here. And I'm friends with a lot of people who were in here at the same time as me. So yeah, this is what we're talking about here. Abuse in the 50s, in the 60s and the 70s in Scotland, of which I hope we can send a clear message of the degree and what happened here and what happened all over Scotland. I remember as a young child, obviously, my first memories, 4, 5, 6 years of age, that this would have been, or seemed much, much bigger. But now it seems like a sort of a not so important building. It doesn't stick out as much as the effect it had on us as children. And as I say, it's all been converted into flats now. But something in my mind feels, you know, the things that happened here, you know, things that I may not have personally been involved in. I know we got smacked, I know we got hit, but there was a lot of serious child sex abuse went on here, as I say, which has been well recorded since. One of the fonder memories, I remember as kids, we used to come in here on Easter Sunday and they used to hide all the Easter eggs for us kids. And of course we'd all get scratched and torn in and fight each other to get in to get the Easter eggs. And all over the land and behind and all over the top here used to be covered in Easter eggs. And you would have, I don't know how many of us are aware, but yeah, this is one of the good memories I have, you know. So it's, you know, people talk about triggering, it's not all bad. There was some good bits as well here, eh? But yeah, I very, very much remember that, and I'm talking 60 years ago.
So, Dave, we've just been to Nazareth House, and you were there until you were 8 years of age?
8 years of age, yeah.
And where did you go to from there?
Well, from there apparently I was taken to Nazareth House last week,
Okay.
Bonnyrigg, which is just outside Edinburgh. Why I was taken there, I have no idea. We can't seem to find the records. Even what was known as records of entry. I've had various people throughout years telling me different things of where I was and who I was. Was I fostered out in between? Was I adopted? Again, this is one of the biggest things why people need to see their records. So the answer to your question is, yeah, I was definitely in last week for the best part of 3 years, but I've got absolutely no memory whatsoever of what happened there.
So I'm here with Dave Sharp, the child abuse survivor and campaigner. Dave, we've just come back from Nazareth House where we covered your early years. You then went from Nazareth House in Kilmarnock to the namesake in
Nazareth House in
Laswade,
just outside Edinburgh.
Now that's where you know that you were there, but you've got a memory gap of anything that happened there. How long were you there for?
When we later found the records, what of the records we could find, I was there for 3 years.
3 years.
But as I say, I've got absolutely no memories whatsoever what happened.
Right, so we went for there with no memory, although you've got the records that say you were there. Where was your next stop, next port of call?
Well, what happened in the days, in the early 70s, what happened in the days in Scotland was when you reached the age of 12, you were automatically put into what's called a List D school,
right.
more or less an approved school, which is for boys that were in trouble. But with us being orphans, and I'd just spent the first 12 years of my life in Nazareth House, we were taken straight into there. And I remember turning up and being introduced to all the priests and what have you, and then I was told to make my way to the recreation room. And what happened is I bumped into a load of guys, and this guy says to me, "What's your name?" And I told him my name, and he says, "Well, where have you come from?" And I said, "Well, I come from here." He said, no, where have you come from? I said, "Here." "No, where have you just been?" I said, "Well, I don't know." What do you mean you don't know? I said, I was in another place, a home, I've been there all my life. Well, where's your mum and dad? I said, I don't have a mum and dad. And that's when one of them called me an orphan. And then they all started laughing. And one of them went over, stuck their head in me, took me down, and they all gave me a kicking. And from then on, my nickname was the orphan. And that was a life I had to endure for the best part of 6 years.
Right. But that wasn't the worst of what happened when you were there.
No.
And in your own words, like, as much or as little as you want to go into and divulge, tell me your experience of that.
Well, what happened is, whether it's a week or a month, we don't really know. What happened is that one of the priests would come into the room and he woke me up and he told me to come into his room. Now, I went into the room and the next thing I remember is waking up beside him, naked, and he was naked, and he was cuddling me and he was telling me how much he loved me. And he picked me up and he took me back to his bed. Now, at that time, no one had ever done that to me. No one had ever shown any love. When we were in the children's homes, like Nazareth House, we used to be, I remember as a 6, 7, 8-year-old child, I remember we used to be always sitting in the recreation room there, and we don't know the extent of the abuse that was going on, but what used to be happening is people used to come visiting, and when the door opened and someone came in, like a visitor, we would all automatically run up and reach over to that person, looking for affection, looking for attention, because we'd never had it. Yes, we had schooling where we would get taken down the hill and taken to Kilmarnock 2x2 with these red and black jackets on, and yeah, we used to get ridiculed. I mean, I know we spoke to someone yesterday, the guy that run the pub. He said he remembered when we were talking to him, he was saying he remembered where the kids from the homes used to come down, he said, and they got bullied a lot. And I kind of remember that, I remember when we used to throw our coats away in protest, and we're only kind of young kids. So yeah, we craved attention, and all of a sudden this man was giving me this attention. But what happened was something happened that turned him. Now, this is obviously what we know now as the grooming process. What happened is that something happened that he became very, very violent. And what happened is there was an incident where, see, we were in the dormitories. And when you're in the dormitories, the priests would come round at night, and the Christian brothers, and they would pick somebody to go and abuse. Now, in the bed next to me was a wee boy called Joe. Now, every night I used to pray that he'd get picked instead of me. Sometimes my prayers were answered, sometimes they weren't. Now, he was my best friend. Now, we used to play table tennis together. We didn't speak much. Nobody did. But one night or one day, all of a sudden Joe disappeared off the face of the earth. And I started asking questions. I said, where's Joe gone? What's happened? This brother Ryan took me downstairs to the cellars. Now, this is an old 16th century building. St. Ninians from the outside looks something like where Dracula goes for his summer holidays. It's the most horrific place. And inside was the same. It was full of these old pictures of, old people who used to own the house, 16, 20 foot high pictures. And of course there was all the rumours of the place being haunted, and some of the punishments where we used to have to stand there all night, which was frightening. But what he did to me, the first one was when he took me down to the cellar and he blindfolded me. And then he put a rope around my neck, and then he tied my hands behind my back, and I could hear these other men coming in. And he tied me up behind my back, and he tied me to the shower, and then and he said to me, he says, if you don't do what we tell you, or if you ever tell anybody what's happening here, you're going to get murdered, just like Joe. That started 6 years of, I couldn't breathe, I couldn't blink, I couldn't open, say words without this man's guidance. This man had everything. He owned and was in ownership of everything I did and said. I was a terrified child, and then started the process of trafficking and various kinds of abuse. When we used to go down to the showers, for example, we used to have a sort of towel that's no bigger than a tea towel. Now, this is the 70s. I'm not even sure central heating was even invented then. I may be wrong, but these places were freezing cold. And he would pick you out. Sharp! You stay behind. So I had to stay behind. And he would leave you there. And then 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, during the night, you'd hear the keys. And that's him coming down. And he would come down and you'd be shaking like a leaf. You're 12 years of age. And he would bend me over the sink. And he'd pull out the strap, and he would just beat you so hard till you're ripped with blood, and then rape. And he would leave you there all night, and then at 7 o'clock or something in the morning, he'd come down and say, right, get up, get your clothes on for class. So you had to adjust. You had to find a way to cope, because again, you've got this thing in the back of your head. If you ever tell anybody, not only you, but the people you tell are going to be murdered. And that's what you lived with. Now, even in the homes when you were being sexually abused, sometimes I would run up, this is the memory I've got, and I'm talking here about how you live with a lie, you know, and there's a very famous saying that nobody likes a liar, and I kind of played on this a lot because I wanted to put people off getting close to me. This is the effect of how these things affect not just the abuse, but the torturous accusations and suggestions, you know. And there was times when I'd been one of them, and I'd be hiding in the toilets or in a cupboard, and somebody would come and find me and say, "What are you doing here?" And very quickly I had to think of an idea that wasn't to do with, because if I tell anybody and it gets back, my life's over. So you very quickly become, and you develop an ability to lie your way out of things. You know, I've used it to my advantage throughout my life. Many years ago, and for a long time, I did it for personal gain. But I like to think that most of the times it was, yeah, I mean, now I do it just for joking. And I'm very good at adding humour and things. That's the way I deal with what I've been through. But I even now, subconsciously or not, lying is something that destroyed every single relationship I had. And it took me 45 years, which I'm sure we'll come to later on, but it wasn't until 45 years later when I went to the press and the Scottish Daily Record covered the story, and I'd been to the police numerous times. They didn't believe me. I'd been in the mental hospitals 5 or 6, 7 times, but I'd never mentioned the murder. This time I did. I went to the Daily Record and it was over the front page, and the next day the paper phoned me and they says, we've had dozens and dozens of people who verifies everything you say about being trafficked over to Ireland, to being trafficked to locks and places with big castles on next to the Loch Ness and all the rest of it. He said, but there's one phone call, Dave, that you need to take. One man's called up, you need to talk. I said, okay, yeah, that's fine. So...
Well, can I just stop you there? Because we'll get to that.
Okay.
Right, we'll come to that. But first, I want to find out, because you said something in the journey here about your 12-year-old child. Now, if you can explain to me, like, because we went to Nazareth House, and one of the things that you pointed out was that there was a bush there where you used to do Easter egg hunts. Now, was there something in particular, was there anything for your time in St Ninians or any other place that you've been in where you've been taken to places that are a memory that you go, oh, I was here and I enjoyed that, or I enjoyed this?
What happened was, in the maths class, the maths class was at the top of the building, and this is what Brother Ryan, he was the maths teacher, as well as the BE teacher, the geography teacher, and sort of other things. What he used to do was, he would point certain boys out. Now, if he pointed you out, sharp, stay over, you knew what was going to happen. And it was always the last class of the day. So what would happen is, everybody else would get sent away. You'd have to stay there. And it's the same again, the same ritual during the night. Now what I would do is, I would sleep under the teacher's desk. And he'd come in. Sometimes he liked to run about in the dark, chase me, and I was terrified. But he'd grab me, again, put me over the desk and leave me there. So I would stay under there. Now, over the years, I developed this thing where this 12-year-old child that was inside me grew and manifested itself. And throughout my life, he's always been there. And yesterday, for example, when we went to Nazareth House, it was running before me, because we seen those bushes where I remember as a 4, 5, 6, 7-year-old child, where every Easter we used to put all the Easter eggs out, and all the kids were allowed out loose with a little basket, and you had to find your Easter egg. So that triggered it straight away yesterday. But there's many times and situations where I'm in, even today coming here, we're at this beautiful caravan site. I remember when we were in Nazareth House, and every year the taxis used to come, Glasgow taxis with all the balloons on it, and the taxi would be full of presents, and these amazing guys would take us to the coast and to the shows, the fair, and if I remember right, they were shut, so it was only us that were allowed in. But I remember very well looking over and seeing these caravans, and I'm thinking, what are they? What are they, little houses? And it's something that my 12-year-old child, sometimes he plays catch up. There's a lot of things, like for example, recently I was thinking to myself, I'm going to grow a beard, and he said, hang on a minute, you haven't learned to ride a bike yet. I want to learn to ride a bike. And I'm saying, hang on a minute, I'm 63 years of age, that's not going to happen. So we've got this kind of relationship going on. But coming here today to this caravan site, again, it brings back the memories of, we used to get taken out. So it's not all bad. But most of my life has been full of tragedy. And this is where my 12-year-old inner child stays, under this teacher's desk. And as we'll see later on, when we speak later on about how we have to ask why this is, how I could spend 16 years of my life in care, and then going through addiction, and then losing my wife, who died in my arms, and then 20 years campaigning without any trouble, turning my whole life around. How on earth would you send somebody like that into a prison? Because when I got into prison, the 12-year-old child took over, and I ended up sleeping not on the bed, but under the desk. So,
Dave's just gave us a wee rundown of what to expect as we go forward. We're going to be examining that a wee bit more, so stay tuned. I'm interested to pick up, Dave, on, you get named or nicknamed the Orphan, which you had mentioned. So tell us a wee bit about why you got that name.
Because I never had mum and dad. I'd spent the first 8 years of my life in care, and 90% of the boys in these approved schools were in for either committing a crime or some sort of events happened at home, you know, but it's mostly that they've been in gangs or something like this, you know. And yeah, most of these went home at weekends, most of these went home at holiday periods, but we had to stay there, and we stuck out like a sore thumb. And these guys would come back after the weekend and have like guitars, and they would have like fags and drugs and all these kind of things. But yeah, we had nothing. We had nothing. We were abused, and these were the worst times when things happened.
Mm-hmm. And so, this is a weekly basis for you, or a daily basis for you.
Mm-hmm.
What did that develop into then? So it was a case of, did you go for the abuse, the constant abuse that was happening when you were in St Ninians, or was there other places? Was there other people involved?
Well, we got trafficked.
So tell us about the traffic.
Well, it took me years and years, and you can look on Twitter, Dave Sharp 59. Recently, a couple of years ago. In fact, it first happened in 2012 when I was starting getting to the press, because I was getting nowhere. Again, going back to when I went to the Daily Records, and all of a sudden, all these men came forward, and the guy I was working with the Daily Record, he says, "Dave, we're hearing things that you've told us that we've no printed. People are telling us that they too were taken over to Ireland. These people are telling us stories about, along with you, getting taken into woods and getting taken into places that have got big locks and a big castle in the countryside where we would be taken at night time, more often than not drugged up, and we'd be put in coffins and we'd be hung by ropes in the woods." And other examples of, and only just this year, not that long ago, I got a phone call from a guy, and he said, "Dave, I follow you on Twitter," and he says, "I've never spoke about this to anybody in my life," he said, "but you and I, am I right? I keep getting this thing that you and I were taken into the woods, and they tied us in onto gravestones, and we'd be tied, and then lots of men would come over and masturbate over us." I said, "That's right, that's right." And what you would do, Peter, is you could ask questions, and were you an orphan? Did you get moved from home to home? And very quickly you knew that there was a section that they knew they could abuse, you know, and we were that section, you know, and then when you start talking about the records again, about looking for the records, I was adopted, I was fostered, and I was trafficked. But in what we don't know, I talked to many other people in Scotland who were adopted and fostered, who ended up being abused, and you say to yourself, and you work out what was actually that, what was covered up. What was covered up for the records as adoption? Mm-hmm. I'll give you an example. I know, I've never found this out, but I know in my mind, and actually contacted, I think it was Nicky Campbell, Lost Families, or other agencies. I know for a fact I was taken to London. I know for a fact I lived in Wimbledon, and I know the names of the people. And I remember they took me to Crystal Palace football ground. But I don't know. That's all I know. I don't know if this was a cover-up. We know there was other boys taken to London who were sexually abused. So this cross-party reference of who was fostered, who was adopted, and who was being groomed, you get the picture of how easy it was for these people to cover their tracks. Mm-hmm. You know, the abusers. Yeah, and for what the paperwork that they needed. What happened in between is only what our word. But they've got evidence that they were doing good. Right. And that's why it's so difficult for people who spend your whole life without an identity. Mm-hmm. Who are you? Where are you from? You know? And I often say to people, as I said earlier on, when you meet people, especially in Scotland, and you go for a job, or you're going in with something, people want to get to know you, what's the first two questions they always ask you?
Well, for Scotland it would usually be where are you fae? Can't I think of the other one?
What school did you go to?
What school did you go to? Right, okay.
So that's where I'm snookered.
Right.
And then you start talking about the lion game. Right? So you've got two choices. You can tell this guy what he wants to hear, or you can tell this guy what you want him to hear. So basically, you can keep running all the rest of your life, which I've done, and a lot of us have, or you can try and blag it. I'll give you an example. For when I go for a job, not now, but before, if I'm going for a job, I need to get a job where there's lots of people, usually a call centre, where they don't ask so many questions. It's easier just to fit in. But then what happens is, every single time, you've got to go through the induction period, which is usually a week, and you've got to sit in a room with 10, 15, 20, 25 other people. And the idea is, let's get to know each other, and let's make some fun. Let's have a good time doing it. So when it comes to, Dave, would you like to come up and tell us a bit about yourself? Do you want me to go up and say, my name's Dave Sharp, I was sexually abused from the age of 16, I was a drug addict for the next 25 years, and I'm trying to fit back into society. Well, I'm not sitting beside him. You know, that's the difficulty. You know, and I'm a Christian, and quite often if I'm going for an interview, I'll get on my knees and say, Father, please forgive me for the sins I'm about to commit. Lying. Because I don't, what else do you do? What can you do?
And that you'd mentioned obviously about learning to lie so that it covered up the threat of you being killed and the people that you're telling about being killed. And that's coerced into you through other people's behaviours and the experiences that you've got, so you've got no escape for it.
There's no escape.
So you learn to lie for convenience so that you don't end up in the threat which has been already passed to you, being killed, and the people you're telling have been killed.
And that's your education. Now, well, normal people are going out and learn about French or geography or maths and human nature and science and, you know, biology. We're being groomed into this life. You know, you don't just come out the door and turn into a normal person. That's you. That's you, especially for someone like myself, spent 16 years in this. 16 years. One of the things we found out, for the records that I did find, is one of the bit of disturbing things is that we know for a fact that while I was in St Ninians, when all the other kids went to the holidays, some of us, including myself, we were getting taken back to Lasswade. So we know something, we know what was going on. Now, I often talk about Lasswade being the paedophile centre of Scotland. Now, it's on record, Savile was there. Savile was a regular visitor. Many politicians were regular visitors. Tam Payton, the Bay City Rollers, was a regular visitor. Now, when we were in St Ninians, when it came to the holiday period, these minibuses would turn up. So the people from Glasgow, the people from Edinburgh, the people from Dundee would get into whatever. Yeah, we'd be up in the rooms looking at the windows, knowing what was about to happen. What would happen is these minibuses would go down the hill, big long driveway leading up to St Ninians, and as they went over the hill and disappeared, no sooner had they gone than other minibuses would come up with priests and Christian brothers in it, and there would start the most horrific abuse. That was the time when they would put us into single rooms. This is what we call the orphan rooms. And when you're in the orphan room, you can't sleep because you know during the night that these people are there, that they're having drugs, drink, alcohol, wild things, and two or three at a time you'd kick your door in and go in, and some of the things I can only describe it as they'd bounce you off the walls. It was horrific. All their angers, all their sexual deviancies, everything came out, you know, and it was horrific. It was and even now to this day, as I say, I have to sleep with a light on, and no matter where I live, I've always got my ear tent. I can't have the television up loud. And I can't have headsets on in the house. I'm a bit, it's not totally like that now. I've learned to mellow a bit because I'm living somewhere now where I'm in up flat, and that's the other thing. I have to get flats where, stay places where I'm not on the ground level, so it's less likely that it's going to happen. And but I'm always aware that the door could get kicked in at any minute,
Right.
even at the age of 63.
So, now there was something that you told me, and it was more leaning towards the ritualistic side of things,
Mm-hmm.
where, and this is in your testimony also, which we'll share at the end of the interview, about you were taken to a place and you were tied up and you were hit with strawberries and wine was poured.
The place, and this happened in Ireland from what I can gather, could have happened to other places. But one of the things I remember is you'd be taken in these houses, and there was usually 5 or 6, 7 of them, mostly naked, and there'd always the big fat one who was the leader, who would direct these men what to do. And what they do is the room would be red, and there would be a lot of red wine poured and drunk, and they'd force it down us, and we'd be drugged, and they would start throwing strawberries and cherries and things at us, and then again masturbating over us. And we know I don't have any intentions or any ideas about how this works. I don't want to hear about it. I don't think people, when people talk about it, I say no, it's a closed door for me. What they were doing, it was ritualistic. I really still to this day don't know what that means, because I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to understand it. I just don't want to ever see or hear about it again. But this is the kind of thing that happened. And when you hear about, when people say that, most of the time we were, I mean, it's the most interesting thing I find about sexual abuse, not just in Scotland, is the fact that so many of us were getting drugged. Tam Payton, the Bay City Rollers manager, he was very, very famous for drugging them, and there was a recent documentary he did where somebody mentioned the fact that Payton was only a couple of miles from Nazareth House last Wade, and what they were doing is they were bribing men to go in and bring the kids out, 20 or so at a time, from this home into Tam Payton's house, where there was parties with a lot of famous Scottish people. Now, then you start talking about the Magic Circle, which had been going on for years and years, which is very hush-hush, and anybody who speaks about it can't be believed, because it didn't happen. If they did, if they talk about it, we've got enough ability and enough power to shut them down. Mm-hmm. And that's why, like myself, what they did to me, they putting me in prison, was the most sick, horrible, disgusting thing, knowing that I'm innocent. I didn't do the things, but it was so easy for these people in position of power, from the top down, whether it's child abuse charities. It's so easy for these people to do something that we thought stopped in the 60s, which is people in positions of power abusing their position.
Mm-hmm. So let's come to that then. What age did you leave St Ninians?
16.
16.
The rule was in those days that on your 16th birthday you left.
Mm-hmm.
And apprenticeships, education, whatever. What happened was, see, all these boys are going away at the holiday period. And I remember asking somebody, I said, why have I not got that? Why do these boys all go out and come back with new clothes? And I mean, I didn't even wear long trousers till I was 16. And we only wore khakis. I think I got fostered out. Excuse me. I got fostered out once, and I came back with a corduroy suit. But somebody took it off me very quickly. I got it nicked through, and yeah, I got beat up really, really bad. And the guy who told me, Pat, he's dead now. He died not long ago. And he was a man that I met in George's Square 45 years later when I was doing one of my campaigns. And we became close friends, and I just lost him not long ago. But yeah, I asked one of the, I think it was the probation officer. Now you've got to remember, I've been in there 6 years. Now they've got a tannoy system. Now, and they call out John Smith, visit, or John Smith, going to hospital, whatever, blah blah blah. My name had never, ever been mentioned. I lived there. I was it. I never went anywhere. I didn't go. Yes, I went away, Foster's sometimes and that, but I was a silent. Not just me. There was a couple of us. This is what we're saying about. These are the ones who look for the records and find where did we go? Why is there no record of why? This is why it's so dark. Mm-hmm. And this is where we're trying to do now, is trying to raise these issues again and think, hang on a minute, why did that happen? Why is there no records? Why can't we tell this boy or this man where he went and why and where did he go and all this? But anyway, so I got taken up to this room. Now you've also got to remember as well, Peter, at the time, in those days, every one of these places was run by gangs. Yeah. And so there was the Glasgow gang, the Dundee gang, and I think there was an Edinburgh. I know there was Glasgow, Dundee, but obviously Glasgow was the biggest gang. And there was more Glasgow people coming in, and I was often getting picked on because I was the orphan. Mm-hmm. So this guy took me in the room, I forget his name, and he said, we found your father. I said, what? He said, you've got a father. Right, okay. He lives in Glasgow. And you've got brothers and sisters. Oh, what? Wow, I didn't know. I was just saying, I'm from Glasgow. Wow. And he said, we're going to arrange next week, you're going to go and live with them. Because what they told me was, this is why it happened, sorry, I remember now. They took me in a room and they said to me, you're going to be 16 soon, and you're going to go and live in one of these hostels. So when you leave here, you're going to an adult hostel. Mm-hmm. And he was telling me a bit about this place. I thought, that doesn't sound much different to here. Am I going to continue being abused? Probably. Mm-hmm. That's when I said, can't you see if I've got any family? Why have I not got this? Mm-hmm. So this is it. So I remember running out his room, and it was on the top floor, the castle. And I'm running down these stairs and I'm shouting, I'm not an orphan! I'm not an orphan! Wow. Oh dear. And I goes into the woodwork class where I'd been.
Right, take a wee break for a minute. Right, you get a wee bit emotional there when you were talking about not finding out that you weren't an orphan and that you had a family.
So I've run down the stairs and I was in the woodwork class, that's where I've been working. I'm not an orphan, I'm from Glasgow. And of course nobody took any notice. So it was arranged I was going to go and live and go for a holiday to meet this family. So a meeting was set, I got taken to Glasgow and I went into this house and there's all these people. And this guy here was introduced as my dad. This woman over here was my Granny Sharp. And there was a sister, and there was a guy over here, big guy with long hair, all these tattoos. And he was like a god. Couldn't believe that this is my brother. And then there was my Uncle David, my Uncle Dougie, my Uncle John, and they spoilt me, and they took me out the weekend, and they bought me sweeties, and I had money in my hand. I'd never ever had money. If I did, I'd never had it long enough to get acquainted, but here I was in long trousers, got my jeans and stuff, and it was just great. It was just a fantastic time.
So you must have thought at that point that, wow, this is me get a chance now to live.
Well, no, Peter, because here's the thing: nobody was there to support either me or them. Remember, this is the early 70s, where nobody can, will, or are able to talk about child sex abuse. So with what happened was, they said, how would you like to go and stay with this family? I went, wow, yeah. And so I went, but within the space of a couple of weeks, it was just everybody else had gone. It was just me, my father, and one of my sisters. And he said, well, we're going to have to go and look for a job. Sorry, what does that mean? You're going to have to go and sign on the brew. I don't know what you mean. And then after a couple of weeks, my sister would say, you haven't changed your underwear. I said, well, I don't know when to. Because in the home, every morning when you got up, you had to change your clothes. You didn't have to do. So probably most of the time you weren't aware you were wearing, because most of the time it was all the same. Just, it was the same khaki brown shorts and the same white or black or blue underpants. So I'd never been even taught how to change my underwear or my socks. So very, very quickly, and I will say this, it became more difficult for them than it did for me. And it very quickly disintegrated into a very uncomfortable and eventually violent, where my father lost his temper with me and hit me with a broom, smashed my face in. This is only after just a couple of months. And I remember this guy who'd been up twice, and he says to me, he says, if you ever don't like it here, you come and live with me. And he says, I live in Northampton, you come and live with me. So at the meantime, I'm finding myself more out on the street. And then I was out with my pals one day, the guys that I just met, and somebody passed me a fag. And I smoked it, and it was drugs, and it made me forget about everything that had happened. And then somebody asked me some powder, and I tried that. And then somebody says that heroin's even better. So I ended up smoking some heroin, and then I became uncontrollable. And I wasn't aware, not only of my responsibilities, but my attitude, my intention, nothing was clear. And I can only imagine I must have been this huge burden on my father. But eventually, one day, I decided I can't do this, I can't live here. I was terrified of the next beating, so I packed a suitcase and I walked all the way down to the motorway, and I said to somebody, I want to go to England. And I remember I ended up in Leeds, outside Leeds, in the country, and I found this little field in a farm. The farm was over there, and there was vegetables, and there was a little river there, and I stayed there for like 3 days, and I never felt more at peace or comfortable. And it was the summer, I remember that, and I didn't want to leave, but the police turned up. Oh, sorry, I'm hitchhiking, and I didn't get arrested. I just said, I'm just on my way down to England. And anyway, I got there, I left, and I got back onto the motorway. I think they dropped me at a service station, and I ended up in Northampton. And I managed to find where my brother was, because what he told me. So I ended up turning up at his house, and but he had a wife and 4 kids in a 2-bedroomed house. And it was also very clear that I think my sister and my father probably told him already that I was already on drugs. And what had happened as well, as I forgot to mention, is that I remember, I think it was my sister who took me to the doctors, and I told them things have happened. You know, I wasn't specific, but I said things, I've just been in care, and straight away, he handed me a script, a very large script of antidepressants and stuff to keep me, and I ended up that script for 25 years. 25 years I had the same script, and it got bigger and bigger. But when I left my brother's house, I found the big magic L, the Big Apple, London. So I moved to London. And when I was in London, I used to see things. I used to, I quickly started bonding with a lot. There was a lot of old Scottish guys there. A lot of the old Glasgow drinkers who, Jackie Buckley, men that became my mentor and stuff like that. And they really, really looked after me. And I became a shoplifter. I also found out ways how you can go to different GPs and get different scripts for different ailments. Right. And and we used to have the 12 o'clock chemist down Soho. So this became my way of life. But and I signed on the dole in Northampton. So I'd got there, sign on the dole, get my dole money, and more than not, moved back down to London, because I'd tried homeless centres. But even with the homeless centres, there was this fear of the abuse, which at this point was still kind of raw in my head, but it was very quickly disappearing. But it was the psychological trauma, but it was also the inbred threats, the red lights that were so apparent within me, and I developed all these what do you call them? These characters, right? All these different personas to accommodate me in any situation that I turned up in. Basically living a lie. I wrote in my book. There's a chapter about the man with 1,000 identities, because I very quickly clung on and became the person who I was with wanted me to be, and it was easy. And what I found is that the further and further you got into deprivation and then squalor and homelessness and psychotic depression, that there was a world there full of these people. It was a very, very dangerous world. I mean, I've been stabbed 3 times. If you put your hand here,
you can see that.
Yeah, I woke up with an axe in my head. Yeah, I woke up. Somebody I'd had a good day shoplifting, and I got a big bag of drugs, and I ended up in a derelict building with other people. And rather than wait until I was asleep, this guy came over and just put an axe in my head and took my drugs, and I ended up in the hospital. So that was a regular occurrence, and it was a dangerous world, but it was the easiest world I could live in to escape my past and my childhood.
Right. Now I'm going to ask you something that struck me in particular, and it was about the responsibility that you felt towards others in that situation. So, and for a visual, imaginary visual, it was about rucksacks in particular.
The kids, yeah.
So tell us about that.
I used to end up in derelict buildings. A lot of the times I became a social outcast because I was a social misfit. And there's a lot of people like that, Peter. Even now you see in a lot of towns there's people who would rather live outside the limits because they don't want to be found. I know a lot of people are too vulnerable to live in the city, to live in the homeless centres, because they'll get raped or mugged. And you got to remember, when you're painting a picture of me, a lot of it's an act. Everything's an act. But one thing I don't think I've ever won a fight in my life, because I've always had that inferiority complex, because I've got nothing to bargain with to be better than where I was. Does that make sense? And what happened is, when I was homeless in London, and I used to go into these derelict buildings and sleep, and I started meeting hundreds and hundreds of kids, a lot from Scotland, an awful lot from Scotland, who would turn up as young as 14 14, 15, with the same stories, similar to mine, being in care or home, being sexually abused, ending up out and nowhere to turn. No one would listen to them. And all these kids would turn up with a rucksack. And the rucksacks always had two things in them: a change of clothes and photographs of their family. Now, very, very quickly, the bad people would get hold of them, the pimps and all this, and they'd be very, very quickly forced into prostitution, rent boys. And quite often I'd be sitting round in a campfire. Now, we'd just been all sitting in the campfire, we'd all be guitars and singing Beatles songs and drinking and doing drugs. And then one would say, "Dave, I've got a punter. Can you watch my rucksack for me? I'll be back in an hour." So, okay. So I'd wait there, and I'd wait there, and wait, and they wouldn't come back. 2 hours, 3 hours, then I'd wait all night, and then they'd fall asleep. And in the morning I realised they're not coming back. We would watch these kids get into these big flash Jaguar cars, posh cars, rich men, and just disappear off the face of the earth. Now, after a couple of weeks or a couple of months, I used to wake up in these derelict buildings, and I've been drunk or drugged up for days, and I'd wake up, and as the sun's coming in through the broken rafters and the broken windows, as the light came in, you would see on the floor dozens and dozens of abandoned, empty rucksacks. And people say to me now, why do you do this work? Why is it? I say, because these are my family. These are my brothers and sisters. And that's why now I go down to London and I go back to these places and I put my headsets on and I play the Beatles songs and I sit there and I can see them, I can smell them, and I can hear them singing. And they'll be with me the rest of my life. And we'll be reunited in heaven in what we call the children's garden.
Mm-hmm. So as well as carrying all your own trauma and all your own abuse, you're carrying all these rucksacks of people that never returned.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It must have been hard for you with everything that had happened to get the escape and see it happening with other people and hearing these stories or sharing those similarities with other people, for them to be left with, well, what's happened to them as a result. Mm-hmm. Because we touched on Joe, and we'll come back to Joe because mm-hmm. Joe will feature a wee bit later on. Mm-hmm. But it's more trauma for you to be taken on board.
Yep.
It must be difficult for you to even... Do you switch off?
You can't, because it's my whole life. 16 years in care, 25 years homeless, and then, as we'll talk about my wife Alice, then 20 years campaigning, and as you've seen yourself, I've spent a couple of days with you now. It's like I hear a different story every hour. Mm-hmm. Probably more than that. This is my life. It's not a case of, people say, oh, he's trying to be this or he's trying to be that. I can't be anything else. When you say about carrying trauma, it's far, far easier to carry the trauma. And this sounds disrespectful to people who do look after people. It's far, far easier to carry the trauma and let people see the track marks where I've injected every day for 25 years and see and watch me being a shoplifter and smelling that, and then they know. It's far, far easier for people to recognise me for what I am. But it's once you start turning your life around and trying fitting into these people's way of life, they're very, very quick to notice you're not one of us, mate. Mm-hmm. And I don't swear, but...
Aye, F off type thing. Yeah. I get where you're coming from.
Yeah.
You were homeless for 25 years.
Over 20 years.
Over 20 years, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
And what changed then?
I was homeless for 25 years. I don't remember having any meaningful relationships. Maybe I've had one or two girlfriends, which was without at the risk of sounding disrespectful, drug related. You know, if I dare say it, I was a very, very, very good shoplifter. Shoplifting's how I made my living. In between Northampton and London, what I used to do is I used to deal with mainly DIY. So I had a black book, so I knew every chippy, paint and decorator, plumber, joiner, and I'd go to all the DIY shops and I would steal Yale locks, drill bits, paint brushes. But what I would do is I'd have like a cricket bag and I would dress up. I'd get an old pair of paint and decorators, one that's roots, that guy's definitely a paint and decorator. So I'd walk into the shops at the DIY centres and I'm one of them. I'm a genuine, and I could go to the paint brushes and I could take the lot. And by the time I go into my where I'm staying, it could be well over 500, 600, £700, and I would always charge a third. So whatever I got, if it was 600, I would charge 200. And quite often I'd have like, I'd find out the bosses of big businesses and stuff, and I'd go, whoa, yeah. And then a month later I'd go back, well, hang on, I've not got rid of the rest. Oh, go on, it's all right, I'll find someone else. No, don't give me them. So they find it hard to resist.
Too good a deal for them to turn down.
Too good a deal. So and again, this is about the drugs and the alcohol. If you think about it this way, and people will question this, but I can only put it this: I had sort of roughly £100 a day addiction. Now, you know, I was injecting with amphetamine. I was just crazy. At one point, I was injecting like 3 grams at a time, 3 times a day, and then necking barbiturates and sleepers, and it's just a crazy amount. But if you look at it this way, right? If I'm shoplifting £300 worth of goods a day, so 7 days a week, you can't take Sunday off when you're a junkie. So if you're doing 7 days a week, that's 2,100. Now, if you take that into a year, 52 years, let's just do weeks off for holidays, and say 50 weeks in a year. When you start adding up and asking that over a 20-year period, and I really did nothing else, Peter. I didn't stop for a break and suddenly go and become a plumber, or I didn't any other craft or any other trade. That was it. Bed set. I used to have enough money to pay a month's rent in advance in a bed set. I'd go into the bed set and something would happen. People would get too close to me and I'd have to leave. Or it came the time to pay the rent and I didn't want to pay the rent, I'd leave. I'd never ever stayed in the one place. And literally, not an exaggeration, if it was at all possible to add it up, I've probably stayed in over 150, 200 places in my lifetime. And then when I came off the drugs and tried to turn my life around, I've probably had over 100 jobs. Many I lasted just like an hour of the interview and I thought, he's too nice. Because he's getting too close. One of the biggest problems is when people get nice to me, I'm fearful because I know I'm going to end up hurting them.
Right.
And I don't want to be that person till I learn slowly.
That must be a lot of the conditioning that you've had throughout your life, where you know yourself, what your own traits are, and you go, right, well, I'm not wanting to hurt this person, so it's better that I distance myself.
So one of the good things I did is what I started to do is I started to educate myself. So I'd find these evening programs that were on, like REBT for example, where it was a 10-week course in a university or something, an evening course.
What is REBT?
Rational Emotive Behaviour Therapy. So I would enlist on it. And what I would do was, if it was, I lived in Northampton, say, if I was in Northampton at the time, and it was in Oxford, and Oxford's like a 2.5, 3 hour journey on the bus, then what I would do is I'd go out there, I'd take my sleeping bag, and and I'd find where the course was, and I would find somewhere close. I said, right, I'll sleep here tonight, somewhere rough, because I can sleep anywhere. So I'd join the class, and it's usually like psychologists and psychiatrists, and the teacher was usually some ex-university lecturer who's doing this now. She's semi-retired, and she's still interested, and she's still got a lot to offer in this field. And I went and I didn't introduce myself, and then very, very quickly, within a very short space of time, what? You've done what? You did what? You said, wow, do you mind if we use you as an example? Yes, of course you can. And this would happen. Very quickly, they would all be sort of asking me the questions, because I'm exactly the kind of person they want to help. These genuine people. And I found myself that these people would pass me on to others. And I found myself, and that way I was teaching myself, learning it through my own self-development, through my own self-experiences, for my own self-awareness. And it worked, and I did that for quite some time. And then I ended up going to tertiary college, and but yeah, that's later on. That's kind of later on in my life, yeah.
Right. So, tell me about Alice.
Right. Okay. What happened was, I was homeless. I think I was sleeping in. Yeah, it was a derelict building, Castilian Street, Northampton, next to the railway station. I'd always tried to get houses, when I was sleeping rough, I always tried to get houses near the railway station, because you could sneak out at night time and steal the coal to heat the house.
Right.
And yeah, it was usually areas where it was darker, because there's no, as far away from housing estates as you could. But anyway, and one day I got introduced to this girl. It was a Scottish girl, and he said, "This is Alice," and where do you work? She worked in Ladbrokes. I went, so all of a sudden I'm now going to become a gambler because I like this girl. So I started getting in the bookies. We became friends, and became pals. We went out for a drink, and we became really, really, really close. And I went back to her flat, and I used to sleep together, but I didn't do nothing. I didn't touch her. Just very, very close. And I felt something, and she became sort of, I don't know, I'm not able to say this about myself, but she really liked me. She was just strangest thing, and I found myself attracted, and all the barriers went down. Just, I can't help what something's happening here. And then we started sleeping, having sex together, and yeah. And then one day she says to me, she says, "We're going to go have a chat." Oh, here we go. Because I used to say to her all the time, Peter, I used to say, nothing bad better happen to you, because bad things have happened to me all my life, and it's, I don't think I can take much more unless, you know, yeah. And she was one of these people, she never looked back. Really strange. She's only 23. She was 10 years younger than me, but she never looked back. She always seemed to, come on with it. She always looked forward. It was just, I felt I wasn't her tail. She wasn't my tail, and I wasn't her tail. But we just really clicked really, really well. And then she says one day, she says, "I've got something to tell you." And she was teasing me all day in the flat. "Come on, what is it? What is it?" But she was laughing, so I knew it wasn't something bad. And then she says, "Are you ready?" I said, "Yeah." She says, "I'm pregnant." I said, "What?" "Yeah," she says, "I'm pregnant." "Wow, that's amazing. I'm going to have a family." What does that mean? I don't understand. I don't know what. So we'd only been together less than 6 months since I'd known her. So yeah, it was just, I don't know what to do. So I did the honourable thing, and I booked a registered office. And on the 20th of April, I was just a handful of people. I didn't know what to arrange. I didn't nothing. And so we went in and we got married. And then we went to the pub and we told everybody. and everybody was happy for us. And now you can help him. This guy's had a bad life, blah 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 blah. And yeah, it was just the most amazing thing. It was just very, very short. And then 5 weeks, exactly 5 weeks after we were married, we went out for a drink, and we got up in the morning, or I got up in the morning, sorry. I woke up and Alice was lying on my body, and I could feel it, and I could feel that she was very stiff. Mm-hmm. And I thought, oh, there's something wrong here, what's wrong? So I got up and I put the light on, and she looked, her colour had changed, blue and stuff, and her face looked at it kind of stretched a bit. I say it's like the Planet of the Apes. I found out later that she died, and that she'd been dead about 7 hours. So, but yeah, and she'd been lying under me, on top of me, sorry. And so I ran out and I ran to my neighbour. And I said, can you come in, please? Something wrong with Alice. He said, well, she's dead, mate. Look, she's dead. I said, no, she's moving. I realised I was in shock. And what they did is they called the doctor, they called the police came out. And the next thing I know, they're giving me drugs. I was taken back into the mental hospital, in and out of. I was in there many, many times, and where they used to sort of stick like that to lick my backside and medicate me, and of course detox me as well. That many times I went in for detox, and I got out for the funeral, and then they sat me down. They said, right, we're going to help you. You need to change your life. You need to move. And it was a Scotsman, it was a Scottish guy in Northampton who said, and he owned a few pubs, he said, listen, there's a few people here, really, what's happened to you, and we want to help you, and we've got some money together, and we've got you a bed set, but it's 20 miles away in another town. Mm-hmm. You need to go and get yourself sorted. Well, I'll come and visit you, but you really, really need to, because if you stay here, you're going to end up killing yourself. Mm-hmm. You know, you're going to end up, you know. So I went to this different town, and I went to the doctors. They put me on medication, and this is when all the child abuse started to resurface, and I started getting all these flashbacks about my childhood, and things have been happening quite, you know, since, and you know, a lot of events that I can't describe, meaning I think a lot of it was trying to come out, but the fear factor, maybe you're living with this abuse that you can't talk about, that you can't describe, and it's a dark secret, but now all of a sudden something in your psychic saying, you know, it has to come out. Mm-hmm. And I remember being in this room flat, and I started consuming massive doses of amphetamines, and pills and vodka and cigarettes, and I'd missed a few appointments with the doctor. So I remember the police come in, the police kicked the door in, and what I heard later is that they seen on the ceiling the two lights had been all cement, the whole thing had been cracked in, and there was a rope on the floor, so I'd obviously tried to hang myself. And so again, they took me into the mental hospital, and this is where it all changed. This is where they sat me down, and the doctor says to me, he said, you've been through a hell of a lot. It's an awful lot of trauma to carry, and you've got a really serious addiction that it's going to take a long time of rehabilitation to sort you out. And then he started talking about the child abuse, and he said, we knew. He said, you've been in here, I don't know if it was 5 or 6 or 7, you've been in here that many times over the years. Mm-hmm. And you've also been in somewhere in Leeds, and they mentioned all these different places where I've been ending up in other cities to try and escape. It was Liverpool, there's other places anyway, and then they started talking about these suicide attempts, Peter. He said, do you remember that you jumped off the railway station in Northampton, off a bridge and broke your leg? I said, I don't even remember that. I said, what I do remember, I said, I do remember an awful lot of times I overdosed and ended up in Northampton General Hospital, and I don't remember which ones were genuine attempts at suicide and which ones were cries for help. And there was another incident apparently, and I knew this later on, that apparently I'd went up to a car park in the city centre and put a rope on the top to try and hang myself, and they talked me down, because as years later I ran a football club for homeless people in Northampton, where I used to take homeless people and people in Cannes, addicts, up to see Northampton. And I remember there was two guys sitting there, and I heard them talking, and this guy said, that's Dave Sharp. He tried to commit suicide. He had a rope round his neck. And I heard this, and I said, what was that? Sorry? Wasn't offended. He said, yeah, don't you remember? Don't you? And I said, no. He said, I remember. He was an addict as well. I remember you. I said, I don't remember that. Now they were telling me, and they told me in the hospital, and it gone. But all these things that eventually came back afterwards that I'd done and forgot about, and even now there's some things that people constantly remind me of. But at this time, they're saying, you've done this and you've done that. And I said, but I've got no memory of that. And this was saying that you've carried that much trauma about stuff. And even if I go into town, even I bump into people in London, if I'm going around to certain places or otherwhere else, and people say, this is the guy that, I say, what? Seriously?
Did you get word back for, was there a cause of death for what happened to Alice? Or were you institutionalised and you didn't know that? Tell us.
They said it was natural causes, and she choked in her vomit. And what happened is, I remember very well getting all these letters that they were sending her body parts for different investigations and examinations. And of course, by that stage, I'd completely lost my mind. It didn't mean anything to me. But I remember going to the inquest, and I remember going into this room in Northampton in the hospital, which was like, you know, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde days, when you get the old movies, and the rooms have got all these big cabinets full of these old swords and saws and the drills for drilling the brain, and just this weird room. But there's nobody else there. I've not got any family, I've not got any supporters or social work, nothing. And I thought I was going to be there for like 2 or 3 days, and I was preparing myself to sit and listen to this, all this information. How did she die? Natural causes, that can't be just, that's not enough. And I remember going in and I had to stand on this thing like a judge, like in a court to a judge. And the guy, they're not talking to me, they're talking to each other. This one was natural causes, she choked on her vomit, death by natural causes. Right, next please.
Just like that?
Just like that was it. For what I remember.
It must have been hard for you to take, even knowing at the age, 23 years of age.
That was the point where, when I say about I had to leave Northampton, that was the point when anger took over. No, this isn't good enough. And this was the first, well, not the first, that's a lie. This was the time when anger took over, in the sense that revenge, and people picked up on this, people who knew me, people in the pub where I drank, and where we had our wedding night, and I was changing, and I was becoming not a nice person to be around. And I was trying to pick fights with people, and it was a lot inside. And as I say, yeah, that's when I moved, and lucky enough I got myself out of that situation. And but yeah, I had to accept it. But at the same time, I'm saying to myself, something's happened. Hundreds of years ago, somebody's upset the gods, and not just me, because I found out, or I knew, in the times that what we haven't talked about is the number of times I've gone up to Scotland to try and build a relationship with my family, but it just never worked. We've never been brought up together. It's been very, very difficult, and I haven't seen them now for a few years. And but yeah, it's just we never bonded, and now more so because all I talk about is my life, child abuse, you know, and I found and discovered that my sisters and not my brother, because he died too early, but they've got the exact same troubles as me. I found a sister, one of my sisters, who was in Cardonald, the girls' home in Glasgow. She was in there, and what they did there, for 10 hours a day, 10 hours a day, all they did was clean 7 days a week. She's now got OCD, and when you get in her house, even pre-pandemic, some of the stuff they were saying in the pandemic, you need to wash your food when you come in. As my sister's been doing that for years.
Oh, I don't know why she's leaving or where she's gonna go. I guess she's got her reasons, but I just don't wanna know. 'Cause for 24 years I've been living next door to Alice. 24 years just waiting for a chance to tell her how I feel and maybe get a second glance. Now I gotta get used to not living next door to Alice.
We can go with that one, or
So, folks, that was the first part, a 4-part documentary. It's very hard to listen to. It's very hard to actually look at some of the stuff that Dave sent us. It's available for you to share on Rumble, and the rest of the episodes will be streamed on Twitter and also on YouTube. If you're affected by any of the issues Dave mentioned, there are organisations out there you can contact. If you at Dave Sharp59 on Twitter, Dave will put you in touch with the necessary organisations. Thanks everybody who tuned in. Don't forget to like, subscribe to not just the YouTube channel, the Rumble channel, Twitter page, Facebook page, whatever, just so that we can get as much traction on this as possible, because we are suffering for terrible censorship, both on Chosen by Sin and the Bridges and on the Tweet Street channel. So thanks everybody for tuning in, and that'll be the end of the stream for this evening.